Hey guys, I just decided to record a little bit of opinionated, or yeah, just opinion-based banter about Dead Space 3, as I just recently finally bought this game and been reading up on some of the reviews on it. I mean, I've already played through it and then I read the reviews. That way I kind of, came to my own conclusion on the game. My own conclusion is the game is 10 out of 10 in my books. Anyway, we'll get to that point later. What I've been noticing as a common occurrence in some of these reviews is a lot of people are, I guess, kind of really put off by the fact that there's co-op and the fact that there's there isn't even a cover system. It's actually not a cover system at all. You can crouch. You can crouch behind walls and things like that. That's about it. But we'll get on to the co-op aspect first. Now, a lot of them were saying that it completely kills the tension in a game like this. While I can agree, I have to chime in that it is an action shooter. If you consider games like Resident Evil 5, that game had zero tension. The reason why is because it doesn't really throw enemies at you that can be all that threatening with the control scheme. Things aren't very fast, and the things that are fast are typically very easy to kill. The only enemy I can think of that was relatively terrifying in Resident Evil 5 was the Reaper, I believe it's called. It's the giant bug thing that has a chance to one-hit kill you. This thing only held, or this creature only held an intimidation factor when I didn't understand how the enemy worked. The moment I knew how to one-hit kill it, I no longer cared about the enemy because it was far too slow to kill me before I killed it. So that removed a very large horror factor from that game. Whereas with Dead Space 3, you are pretty much guaranteed to get hit because most of the enemies will come from places that you're just not looking, and you cannot possibly be looking that way 100% of the time. Sometimes, yeah, like enemies would fly out of the vents, and I would already be looking that way, and I would shoot it. Game over for that monster. But some of the times, it would drop down from a ceiling or come out from behind me when I just was not expecting it. And while it wasn't, like, frightening enough to the point where I screamed and hollered and ran to a corner and cried, these games just don't really do that for me. So maybe I have a different opinion on these kinds of things. For me, it was an initial jump, and that rush of adrenaline, I spun around and shot it. And that's, in my opinion, how one of these, or the best one of these games is going to get. Because the control scheme gives you a lot of power over your environment, so it's hard to be afraid of the enemies around you because you have full control over things, and you have a lot of weapons in your arsenal. So, in terms of the scare factor, I'm not too tense for one of these. It's never a spooky tension thing. In the darkness, that can add a horror factor as well as how dark the game can get, but that hasn't changed. Co-op doesn't change it, single player doesn't change it. The game will always be dark. Which, on that note, I find the lighting absolutely phenomenal. The fact that it's not just blackness when you shine the flashlight over there. There is actually textures and all that, yeah, good textures around in those shadows. But the shadows are well out of the light. Everything looks very realistic in terms of lighting, save for a few graphical glitches, but, these things happen. One thing about the lighting as well is, in terms of, with Resident Evil 5, I think when they had, I'm using Resident Evil 5 as an example for a lot of this, because Resident Evil 5, for me, its setting was very bad, and it's not because of where it was placed. That has nothing to do with it. I guess, not necessarily setting, I don't know what I would call that, but my issue was the fact that it was too bright. I could see everything around me, and everything was too slow to be really all that sneaky anyway. So I would look at it, it could be all the way across the area, but I would see it because it's broad daylight. And it wouldn't be a problem anymore, because I'd see, even if it went off the screen, it could go off to the right or off to the left. And it just doesn't bother me anymore. I know where that guy went, I can go off about my business, I know there's somebody there now. But what Dead Space 3 does is it doesn't let you know that there's an enemy there. I mean, obviously it's an action game. Of course there's enemies there, but you don't know where they are. So no matter what, there's always going to be that factor. So I guess maybe that's a bit of tension. And a lot of people are saying that co-op removes tension from the game. I completely disagree, because at least for me personally, the co-op experience was no different from me playing Dead Space 2, which is purely single player. It has no co-op function whatsoever. And wow, I'm talking a lot without breathing. And with the co-op, I feel that it actually adds to a lot of the gameplay, because with Dead Space, it has no like HUD or interface or anything like that that you know, borders your screen. There is none of that. Every single bit of information that you get from the game is, you know, on your character's model or on your gun's model or in front of your face, like it's on a panel in front of you. It never goes into one of those screens that disconnects you from the world around you. And this is an awesome feature for co-op because it adds to immersion in co-op. Despite the fact that it's a third-person shooter, you can look over your buddy's shoulder and see exactly what he is looking at. You can look at his back and see what his health is like. You can see what his stasis is like. You can see how much ammo he has. Actually, I think you can. I don't remember, but you can see so much of your friend's screen just from what will show up on your screen by default, and he can see everything that you're doing as well. So in that aspect, you can help each other a lot as well. If your friend is clearly in dire need of health, you will know. You don't need to ask, hey, what's your health like? You can just look. You know, just look at his back like, you know, the NPCs naturally would in the storyline, or like in, realistically thinking, if you were in the Dead Space universe, you would look at somebody's rig to see if they were healthy or not. If their health is in the red, you tend to that person. You do that in co-op. You actually, like, do this. There's no separation from the game world there's no separation between immersion and co-op. They're both the same. You're completely immersed in co-op. And this, for me, is more important than the scare factor, because I don't typically get that scared in games. If I'm looking to be frightened or stressed out or have a lot of tension in my game, I will play a game that is specifically designed for that. Like, absolutely no emphasis on the action, no emphasis on, well, emphasis on the graphics, obviously, but, because most games have emphasis on graphics nowadays, but no emphasis on, like, the action-packed, oriented gameplay, more on the setting, the spookiness, and just keeping you on edge all the time. One game that comes to mind would probably be Amnesia, for the fact that you can't really fight back, so you have to run, thus creating a situation for you where you need to run away from something that you can't fully escape. It will always stay on you because it runs faster or about your speed, depending on how close or how far away it is. Spoilers on gameplay mechanics. I suppose I should probably put that in, like, the the info or something like that. I'll do that later. Anyway, but yeah, that's the kind of game I'd look for in terms of getting tense and being afraid. Dead Space 3, I look for good gameplay as one thing. 2, a very good setting. They have always had amazing scenery, great lighting and graphics. Like, just how they have done, like, when you look out the windows and see space, it actually looks like space, you know? It doesn't look like just a bunch of dots out there and then it's just clear. I mean, if you're in a debris field, you see debris all over the place. There's stars way off in the background. And that's another cool thing, too, is you don't know if that's a place you're going to be exploring or not. So you kind of want to get a feel for what you're looking at. And 3, satisfying arsenal. That's kind of what I go to Dead Space for as well. I enjoy most of the guns, and in Dead Space 3, the guns are phenomenal. I love them. Except for a few were a bit disappointing, but that's in every game. To be quite honest, I can't down on Dead Space specifically because a couple guns were not satisfying to me. Big deal. Cry River. And actually, one thing, I'm going on wild tangents. I'm probably going to end up repeating myself. Whatever, we'll do nothing about that, actually. We're not going to do a thing about that. If I repeat myself, I am sorry. However, one thing that I absolutely loved, and now this might have, because I just got this game on March 21st, didn't get to play it until March 22nd of 2013. So maybe when the game came out, it wasn't optimized as well, but for, like, when I played it then, it was, to be honest, optimized awesomely. Maybe patches came out for it, probably have, but I did not get a single frame drop no matter what happened on that screen. Huge effects could explode onto my screen and I did not drop a single frame the entire game, start to finish. So that to me was awesome considering how high I have the graphics up to max. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I don't have the best of the best gaming systems. There's a lot of things that it falls short on. I won't give the specific specs. I'll just assure you that there are still some things that it lags horrendously on the best possible graphics. StarCraft 2 is one of those particular games that I can think of where if I absolutely max the graphics out, I can't play a match that goes past 10 minutes because it lags so bad. Yet, I can go into Dead Space 3, which is fully 3D. It has all of you're inside the ships and all of that. You're out in space, flying around, and I didn't drop a single frame. It ran smoothly from start to finish. That to me was amazing, especially since most games aren't optimized nearly that well anymore. I don't think I can add anything onto the optimization. I've pretty much covered everything that I liked about that. But I'm going to go back to the reviews that I had read. One particular thing that I heard was apparently a lot of people were having nightmarish problems with something called mouse acceleration. Now, most people who would watch something like this probably know what mouse acceleration is, but to those who don't, mouse acceleration changes the speed at which the cursor moves depending on how fast the mouse moves. So if I move the mouse slowly, the cursor would move slowly, but if I move it quickly, if I move the mouse quickly, the cursor would double in speed, which in theory seems like a good idea until you realize that it's kind of like aiming a gun, but when you moved the gun slowly, the crosshairs moved 2 times as slow. But if you moved it just like if you just did this kind of quick jerk reaction, it would just like fly off into a corner. You would, you know, you'd shoot up in the sky instead of shooting at your target. That's kind of what mouse acceleration is like in a shooter. That's actually exactly what a mouse acceleration is like in a shooter. However, this might have been different when the game first came out, but when I went into the game on the date that I said, there was no mouse acceleration. Absolutely none. There wasn't even an option for it. I couldn't shut it off. I couldn't turn it on because it actually just didn't exist. And I aimed perfectly. I could go through the menus perfectly. I could access everything in that game perfectly without a single spot of mouse acceleration or mouse smoothing. Absolutely none at all. So the fact that these people were saying that they were having a nightmarish time with mouse acceleration either leads me to believe that it was patched out of the game, or perhaps they just had it turned on in Windows. So I don't know, but that's hardly a gripe in my opinion, unless it was actually in the game on release. If it was not, and these people were, you know, whinging about mouse acceleration, maybe you should have checked your Windows settings first? That might have been a good idea. I have all my stuff like that shut off. I went into Dead Space 3, and voila, it wasn't there. Just at all. It felt like a completely normal shooter. Not sure if you guys can hear this or not, but I'm getting messages in Steam. Not gonna respond to them, however. We're too busy talking. What is another thing I can note from the reviews? Right. How to word this? So the tension was noted, and then there were people who mentioned the mouse acceleration. Then there were other people who had gripes about the story's ending. Now, I won't add any spoilers to the story's ending, but I personally liked it. It gave closure, and I just enjoyed where it went. A lot of people disliked the ending from what I read, and I personally don't see it as something that they should be downing on the game for. This seems more like a personal preference thing, and I don't think it should even have a part in reviews, period. It should not be there. If you didn't like how the story ended, then that's your problem. That's not a fault on the game. That's a fault on your preferences, and that's not a bad thing. You don't have to like it. You're not, you know, worse off because you didn't like it. You just didn't like it. It's the same as, you know, people reading a book and not liking this book but liking the other book. It happens. People like different stories, and people like different endings. It's just how things go. But I don't think any of that should ever play a part in a review. If it's just not your cup of tea, don't write about it. Don't play it. Don't, you know, talk about it. If it's that much of a problem for you. Like, for instance, if you don't like vampire stories, don't read a story that's primarily about vampires. You know, not naming names, but... And if you don't like stories that are about war, don't read a war story. If you don't like games that are about war, don't play Call of Duty. You know? It's just that simple. If you don't like games that could potentially end grimly, don't play a grim game. That's what Dead Space is. Like, for instance, I can call upon the ending to Dead Space 1. Whoever hasn't seen that. Ended on a cliffhanger that kind of... It was pretty grim. So... And it was kind of like that jump scare. Like, wow. And... You know, your mind could have wandered to a point where it's like, oh, well, you know, that obviously ended poorly. Dead Space 2 would say otherwise, as, you know, the game came out and it was the same protagonist. But the principle still applies. If it's just not your cup of tea, don't get into it. It's kind of like, you know, people getting into the ending, or rather the climactic ending to Mass Effect and then getting pissed off about the way Shepard ended. Now, actually, no, I won't even get into that. That's rant for an entirely different time. We won't do that right now. We're on Dead Space 3 here. Something else that I particularly liked was how co-op and single player were separated. There are a lot of people who gripe that co-op existed. Well, you don't have to play co-op. You can play single player, and the co-op character actually just doesn't follow you around. He's not there. It's not like Resident Evil 5. It's not like Left 4 Dead. You don't have a bot following you. That person just isn't there. So you are by yourself. It is Dead Space solo. That's what it is. So when people mention that the co-op kills it for them, just don't play co-op. You don't have to. That's entirely for somebody who wants to play co-op. And for me personally, I think I preferred the game as co-op because, again, these games just don't scare me. I went through the entirety of Dead Space 2 paying more attention to the pretty effects and the pretty graphics than to the monsters that were trying to kill me. That's just kind of how I went through the entirety of that game. It could be dark as hell. I would go up to a window and I'd go, wow, look at all that scenery. While there's monsters clearly 2 feet from me, screaming and hollering and trying to claw at me. They wanted my face, but my face was directed towards space, having a good time. And that's kind of what I felt, or how I played Dead Space 3. In fact, I jumped a lot more during Dead Space 3 than I did in 2. Because I just play co-op games differently. I'm a lot more vocal for co-op games because I actually play them with, you know, the voice chat. I go on Skype for them. And also, another thing that I can mention is the co-op doesn't even remove one-hit kills. You can get downed and you can get picked up, but you can actually turn this feature off. So you cannot pick your partner up. If your partner goes below 0 health, or below 1 health, you know, 0 or minus, he is dead. The game ends, you have to restart. And this was a cool feature for me, because it gave you the option to have that more co-op friendly way of doing things, where you can pick your partner up if he gets down, or you could go more of the hardcore route, where if your partner's dead, he's dead. You have to start over again. And then, on top of that, even if you pick that setting where you can pick your partner up, there are still one-hit kills that will kill you regardless. If your body gets into a situation where it is ripped apart, you cannot be picked up. You are dead, and you have to restart. So if you get crushed, done. If you get hit by an explosive and it blows your arms off and then your legs, done. Your character is dead. You have to start from the checkpoint. So I like that they kept that part in, because the only part of that was kept in for Resident Evil 5 was like the Reapers and the Chainsaw guys. It was very obvious. But in Dead Space 3, it can kind of take you by surprise. You can be going down a hallway and suddenly an explosive goes off and you were just that low on health where your body just turned into a pile of gib on the floor. It came as a surprise multiple times, and it hit so suddenly you couldn't react to it. You just kind of sat there as you watched your body parts fly away, and it was like, oh wow, so that just happened. And it didn't have to be scary, because it was that sudden in your face, boom, you're dead, and you're sitting there staring at what remains of your corpse. I never found this to be scary in any game. Gore doesn't freak me out. So I just kind of thought that was a cool aspect, because it's you kind of just have to sit back and it's just that, oh wow, okay, I'm dead. It doesn't have to be scary, it doesn't have to be tense or anything like that. It's kind of like a brick to the face, you know, like zombies supermaning through windows and grabbing you without without a bit of warning, that kind of thing. So Co-op still has those dangers. You can still die a horrible, horrible death all too suddenly without warning. And then if you turn off that feature where you can pick your partner up, it's effectively like playing the solo game where you don't have anybody that picks you up, but you have your buddy around. So it adds strategy. One review I read, I actually agreed with fully, for the most part, actually. I shouldn't say fully, because there were some things that I was kind of like, eh, maybe not. But the one... I went on too wild of a tangent. Wow. Shit. Right, the pick-me-up system, even if you turn it off, you're still kind of by yourself, but you still have that added strategy in there, where, you know, you can get your partner and you to set up, you know, trip mines, or you can use the explosives around the environment and set them up with your kinesis. You can do all kinds of things like that. Or the strategy can go even deeper, where you're even making your weapons complement each other. Like, for when I went through my playthrough, I went with close range, get the fuck out of my face weapons, where my friend went with the kind of longer range, automatic sort of deal. So I was the one-shot, get out of my face sort of gun for my primary, whereas he kind of did the range, fully automatic sort of deal. And then for my offhand, or my secondary, I did the same thing he had done, and he did the opposite, so we could switch on and off if we ever decided to split up from each other, or if we were on the opposite ends of the room, and we could not get to each other in time. So if we couldn't help each other, we had that weapon to pull out to save our ass. And another thing was bosses. Co-op adds kind of a different feel to bosses. Well, for obvious reasons, the boss can get distracted by your partner while you go and do something else. Now, this doesn't make it necessarily easier, because what I was noticing is for some of the bosses, most of them have ads. In fact, all of them have ads that I can recall. So the fact that you have a partner around really doesn't change it. You can still potentially have every single monster on you at the same time as both players, because there are ads. There's multiple enemies, including the boss that you're fighting. So it doesn't make them easier. In my opinion, a lot of people that had too easy of a time throughout the co-op should have just put it on a harder difficulty. I didn't screw around. I didn't put it on easy, I didn't put it on normal, I put it straight on hard, because I wanted a challenging game. Now, I didn't die repeatedly. In fact, most of the deaths that did happen were kind of that, whoa, so I'm dead all of a sudden, kind of death. The only one where something became too difficult were a few places, but I'm going to be playing through the game, once again, very soon on the impossible difficulty, as I believe it is now unlocked. And this holds a lot of promise, because nearing the end of the campaign on hard mode, I was running into a lot of enemies that just, unless you were using every single tool in your arsenal, you would not get them down without getting hit. And when you did get hit, you certainly felt it. Your health bar dropped. It plummeted like a rock. A sack of rocks, even. So that part was pretty intense, so I suspect in impossible difficulty, it's going to get even worse, which for me is fun, because I like that. And for the pack ratting, I noticed for one review, I'm not sure about the others, but one person mentioned, not naming names, I'm just referencing them. One person was saying that in Dead Space 3, they felt that they had, like, the co-op gave them no fear in terms of supplies. Perhaps that's a problem to somebody who's kind of new to the genre, but for me, in Dead Space 1 and 2, I had a near limitless supply of items, because There were, in at least 2 I can recall, and 1 I can't entirely remember the gameplay. I didn't even play it that long ago. I just didn't register that much because, to be quite honest, I hated Dead Space 1. So when Dead Space 2 came out, I decided to play it as kind of reluctant, and the game just blew me away. It was so good. But with Dead Space 2, it had a stash system, like a safe system, kind of like the, the chests in Resident Evil. If you give me a chest, I am going to pack rat every single thing I find, and I'm going to pack light. I'm going to have the absolute least amount of ammo, and I'm going to make my shots count. It's not even something that I have to try at anymore. It just happens. And imagine, for a lot of people that have played this genre of games, or this genre of game for a long time, do the exact same thing as me. I mean, I can note a few people that I know that do the exact same thing as me. They pack rat like crazy. So supplies are never a problem. But one thing that I did notice with Dead Space 3, playing it co-op first before I played it solo, is the loot off of corpses and things like that is randomized. So your friend might get ammo, but you instead will get, say, scrap metal or a med kit, or med gel? I'll just call it a med kit. So you weren't all, like, if somebody found ammo, you weren't guaranteed to run over there and have ammo. It didn't duplicate the ammo. It sometimes did, but it was completely random in what it dropped. That person could get ammo. That person could get med kits, but you got something entirely different. Maybe you got crafting materials. Maybe you didn't get any ammo or any health at all. So you could still end up with a pretty dire situation on your hands. But, again, if you're just careful, like any experienced person in the survival horror genre is, they pack rat their stuff. They make every single shot count. They don't waste ammo. They use the gun that is going to use the least amount of ammo until they have a surplus of it. If they have a lot of ammo, then yeah, use the power guns. Use the ones that are going to hurt. That's what I did. I conserved. I didn't use a single bullet that wasn't necessary until it got to a point where I just had so much crap in my inventory that I could just go absolutely nuts. And that's what I did for Dead Space 2 as well. That didn't change for me. So that being a gripe in the game, it really wasn't different from Dead Space 2. There was no ammo problem in Dead Space 2. I never ran into that. So really, to gripe about that as like an issue with Dead Space 3 specifically, I think you should just attack the whole series if you're going to do that. You can't big up the first 2 games and then hate on the third one because it has the exact same system as the first 2 games do. You can't do that. That makes no sense. It doesn't even have logic. Now, if that system just pissed you off in general, fair enough, but at least attack the whole series if you're going to be doing that. Don't hate on Dead Space 3 because it did the exact same thing that the first 2 did. Because in my opinion, 3 did everything right. There wasn't a single thing that I noted where it's just like, oh, well, this sure is a down step from Dead Space 2. I love Dead Space 3. It was everything Dead Space 2 was, but it improved on every single aspect. And then it had more. So it was, as one of the reviewers said, kind of had the feel of Dead Space 1 where you're doing a lot of the mechanic stuff like the engineering, but it still had all of the action that Dead Space 2 had. You know, the flying through places and getting into really intense situations where the screen's shaking, you're being tossed around like a rag doll. Your buddy's probably being tossed around like a rag doll. But, yeah, don't hate on the first 2, or the third game, because it does the exact same thing as the first 2. Doesn't make sense. And in terms of immersion, I think the co-op adds more immersion for me than what solo play would do. Because solo play, I screw around. I don't really acknowledge a whole lot. I pay attention to the story, but usually I have to play through a single-player game at least a couple of times before I fully absorb everything that's going on. Because certain things I just stop paying attention to. because I'm getting impatient or something's going on and I just can't pay attention to it. With a co-op player, I was more inclined to stop and listen to a lot of the story because he was too. He wanted to listen to a lot of stuff, and so did I, so it just became kind of that routine thing. Every time we came to a video console or like an audio thing, we stopped and listened to it. And like for gameplay, again, it had the very immersive feel to the overall, like the UI in quotations, the UI that didn't exist, because everything is shown up on your character model, which in my opinion is brilliant the way they did it, especially for a co-op game, because they had that system before they even thought about co-op, probably. As it turns out, it's a kick-ass system for co-op games. Who knew? And I just love that aspect. I could peek over my friend's shoulder and see that they were doing something in the interface, you know? It was a very immersive experience, and I liked that. So, does co-op remove immersion? Absolutely not. It adds to it, because there's those features that I guess a lot of people just don't really consider. Does co-op remove from the tension? I don't believe so, because I'm never really tense for those games anyway. In fact, the co-op may even add more tension because you're playing from two separate sides of the coin. Like, one player plays Isaac, the other player plays Carver. And the way they did this co-op system for the storyline was brilliant. For certain things, Isaac's looking at a completely normal screen, and Carver is just, he's hallucinating, he's looking all over the place, he can't even comprehend what's going on. He's not even seeing what Isaac's seeing, because he's off hallucinating. And so Isaac's sitting there. So imagine, for instance, if you didn't have like Skype or something like that, and you see your partner wigging out and just kind of, he just like stands perfectly still, looks like he's having a headache, or he's just shooting off into the distance or something like that. And you're just looking over at him going, what the fuck are you doing, guy? Well, he's hallucinating. He thinks he's shooting at something, but he's not. It kind of has that Kane and Lynch feel, which, in my opinion, was quite brilliant. Too bad I didn't like the game all that much, but one particular part I fucking loved. And it had the same situation where you're just going absolutely batshit crazy on all these civilians, and your partner's sitting there like, whoa, dude, what the fuck are you doing? You're killing all the civilians because you think they're cops. You're looking at the screen, and every single one of them's cops. You're sitting there flipping out because there's so many cops in the room. As it turns out, they're all civilians. Your character's like wigging out. He's going into withdrawals or something. He's like high. I don't know. I can't remember it that well, but I do remember the hallucinating part. And that's kind of what playing Carver feels like. So in terms of immersion, there's a lot of that where you, as a person, look at your teammate and go, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what are you following? What are you looking at? And you, as playing as Carver, you think it's perfectly normal because you're seeing it. Obviously, the other player sees it, right? Wrong, but they don't know that. You don't know that. So that's just a very cool aspect for me. Adds a lot of immersion. And I don't get immersed in very many games. In fact, I don't even get immersed in like games like Skyrim. So the fact that I get immersed in a third-person shooter, Dead Space, pretty big deal. At least for me. Probably not to anybody else, but it is for me. But yeah, there's a lot of other things that I could probably say about Dead Space 3, but I would like to go through the impossible difficulty before I draw full conclusions. But to be honest, Dead Space 3, 10 out of 10. It did everything right. It looked at what the previous games did right. It did those things, and then it did more. It went that extra step further, extra 2 steps further from there. And that, in my opinion, was awesome. I love the game, and I think a lot of people should give the game a chance when they're looking at it, because really, if you look at the games that are out now, there's very few big title games that you can actually go into and say, wow, this game was actually what I was expecting. It looked like a kick-ass game. I went into the game, and what do you know, it was a kick-ass game. You don't get that very often anymore. It's all about the trailers, you know? You go into the trailer, and it's like, wow, it looks so awesome, and then you get in the game, it's like, wow, this isn't what I expected. Dead Space 3, I went into it, and it was awesome. 2 thumbs up. From me, at least, and I hope other people give it 2 thumbs up as well, because, frankly, if they do decide to do another Dead Space or something like it, I would like them not to change the formula too much. I think the formula is fine. It doesn't need to be changed, perhaps improved upon, but not changed. And that's kind of where game developers are at right now, is they always feel that they need to change it drastically if people didn't like it. And I don't want to... I'd rather that impression not come across. I think minor changes and improvements on certain aspects as opposed to just changing the game entirely. But, on that note, I think I'll leave my rambling alone and just stop with this whole nonsense. I won't be doing any Dead Island for a while because obviously I am occupied with these new games. Just recently got Resident Evil 6 for the PC as well. Quite stoked about that. Took a hell of a long time to launch the game, but once I launched it, I was having fun with it, even though the controls were so bad. I had to go through the key bindings and completely remap the whole game because apparently none of the people that made that game actually know how to use a keyboard. Anyway, I'm rambling again. I'm done, so that's that. I won't be doing Dead Island for a while. I might be eventually, but for now, see you guys. Ta.